What if everything you've been taught about history's most infamous betrayer was a lie? What if the man whose name has become synonymous with treachery and deceit was actually carrying out a divine mission, following direct orders from the very person he supposedly betrayed? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most explosive discoveries in modern archaeology, a forbidden text that was buried in the Egyptian desert for over 1,300 years. A manuscript so controversial that early church fathers ordered it destroyed wherever it was found. This isn't just another lost gospel. This is a document that completely flips the entire foundation of Christian theology on its head. The Gospel of Judas. A text that doesn't just challenge what you think you know about betrayal, sacrifice, and divine purpose. It reveals a secret so dangerous that religious authorities have spent centuries ensuring it never saw the light of day. But here's what they couldn't control. In 1978, a papyrus codex surfaced in Egypt containing this forbidden manuscript. After decades of authentication, translation, and scholarly debate, we now have access to knowledge that was deliberately erased from history. What you're about to discover will shake everything you thought you understood about the crucifixion story. Because according to this ancient text, Judas wasn't the villain of Christianity's greatest narrative. He was the hero, the chosen disciple. The only apostle who truly understood Jesus' mission and had the spiritual strength to carry out the most difficult task ever assigned to a human being. But this revelation goes far deeper than just rewriting one character's role in ancient history. The Gospel of Judas opens a window into an entirely different understanding of Christianity that existed in the first centuries after Jesus' death. A version of the faith that was systematically suppressed, its followers persecuted, and its texts burned by the emerging Orthodox Church. We're talking about Gnostic Christianity, a mystical tradition that taught secret knowledge about the true nature of God, humanity, and salvation. According to these hidden teachings, the material world itself was a prison created by a false deity. True salvation didn't come through faith and good works, but through gnosis, direct spiritual knowledge that could liberate the soul from physical existence. And Judas, in this forbidden gospel, he becomes the key figure in humanity's liberation. The disciple who understood that Jesus' death wasn't a sacrifice for sin, but an escape from the material realm. The man who helped free the divine spark trapped within Jesus' physical form. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like complete heresy. How could such a radically different version of Christianity have ever existed? How could Judas, the betrayer, suddenly become the hero of the story? And why would church authorities go to such extreme lengths to suppress this particular text? Well, here's what most people don't realize about early Christianity. For the first 3 centuries after Jesus' death, there wasn't just one version of the faith, there were dozens, hundreds even. Different communities, different teachers, different gospels, all claiming to preserve the authentic message of Christ. The version of Christianity that eventually became Orthodox, the one that gave us the New Testament as we know it today, wasn't established until the 4th century. That's when Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity, and church councils began deciding which texts were divinely inspired and which were heretical. But before that process of canonization, Christian communities across the ancient world were reading Gospels that never made it into your Bible. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Philip, and yes, the Gospel of Judas. These weren't fringe texts written by isolated sects. They were sacred scriptures used by thriving Christian communities that sometimes outnumbered what we now call Orthodox believers. The Gnostics weren't a small cult. They were a major branch of early Christianity with sophisticated theology, organized churches, and influential teachers. So when we examine the Gospel of Judas, we're not looking at some obscure heretical fantasy. we're examining a legitimate expression of early Christian faith that offers a completely different understanding of the crucifixion story. An understanding that was violently suppressed because it threatened the power structure that the emerging Orthodox Church was trying to establish. Think about the implications for a moment. If salvation comes through secret knowledge rather than institutional authority, what happens to the power of bishops and priests? If the material world is inherently evil and spiritual liberation means escaping physical existence, what happens to the Church's teachings about moral behavior and social order? If Judas was actually the hero of the crucifixion story, carrying out Jesus' direct instructions, what happens to the entire theological framework of betrayal, guilt, and redemption? The stakes couldn't have been higher. And that's exactly why this text had to be destroyed. But let me take you back to the moment this forbidden knowledge was rediscovered. Picture this. Somewhere in Middle Egypt, in the late 1970s, local farmers stumble upon a limestone cave. Inside, they find a leather-bound codex, its pages made from papyrus, preserved by the dry desert climate for over 17 centuries. This wasn't just any manuscript. Carbon dating would later confirm that the papyrus dated to the 3rd or 4th century CE, making it one of the earliest Christian texts ever discovered. But the farmers who found it had no idea what they possessed. To them, it was just old paper that might fetch a few dollars from antiquities dealers. And so began one of the most dramatic sagas in modern archaeology. This priceless manuscript, containing knowledge that had been lost to humanity for over 1,500 years, was sold on the black market. It passed through the hands of dealers, collectors, and scholars. It was stored in bank vaults and private collections. It suffered damage from improper handling and storage. For decades, the academic world knew that the Gospel of Judas existed in some form, but couldn't access it for study. Ancient church fathers had written about this heretical text, condemning it as dangerous fiction. But no complete copy had survived the systematic destruction campaigns of the 4th and 5th centuries until now. When scholars finally gained access to the manuscript in 2001, what they discovered sent shockwaves through the academic world. This wasn't just a fragment or a partial text. This was a complete gospel, containing conversations between Jesus and his disciples that appeared nowhere in the New Testament. And at the center of these dialogues was Judas Iscariot, portrayed not as a greedy betrayer, but as the most faithful and understanding of all the apostles. The authentication process was exhaustive. Carbon dating confirmed the age of the papyrus. Linguistic analysis verified the authenticity of the Coptic translation. Paleographic studies examined the handwriting and manuscript construction. Every test confirmed what seemed impossible. This was a genuine ancient Christian text that had survived the centuries-long campaign to erase it from history. But here's where the story gets even more intriguing. The Gospel of Judas wasn't just some random heretical text that happened to survive. According to the manuscript itself, it contained secret teachings that Jesus shared only with his most trusted disciple. Knowledge so profound and dangerous that it couldn't be revealed to the other apostles. The text begins with these startling words. The secret account of the revelation that Jesus spoke in conversation with Judas Iscariot during a week, 3 days before he celebrated Passover. A secret account, private conversations, hidden teachings. This isn't presenting itself as just another gospel story. It's claiming to preserve the most intimate and confidential dialogue between Jesus and the disciple who would supposedly betray him. And what Jesus reveals to Judas in these private moments completely transforms our understanding of the crucifixion narrative. According to this forbidden text, Jesus doesn't just know that Judas will hand him over to the authorities. He specifically instructs Judas to do exactly that. But why? What possible reason could Jesus have for commanding his own betrayal? The answer lies in the Gnostic understanding of salvation itself. In Orthodox Christianity, Jesus' death on the cross is a sacrifice that atones for human sin. His suffering and death pay the price for humanity's redemption. But in Gnostic theology, the material world itself is the problem. Physical existence is a trap, a prison that keeps divine souls separated from their true spiritual home. From this perspective, Jesus' death isn't a sacrifice for sin. It's an escape from the limitations of physical existence, and Judas isn't betraying his master. He's helping to liberate the divine spirit that was temporarily trapped in Jesus' human form. This radically different understanding of salvation explains why the Gospel of Judas portrays Judas not as a villain, but as the most spiritually advanced of all the disciples. While the other apostles still think in terms of earthly kingdoms and physical resurrection, Judas understands the true nature of Jesus' mission. He grasps that the goal isn't to reform the material world, but to transcend it entirely. The text presents Jesus explaining this cosmic truth to Judas in language that would have been immediately recognizable to Gnostic communities. References to multiple heavens, divine emanations, and the imprisonment of souls in physical bodies. This isn't the simple moral teaching of the canonical Gospels. This is sophisticated mystical theology that required years of study to fully comprehend. And here's what makes this discovery so explosive for modern Christianity. If the Gospel of Judas preserves authentic early Christian teaching, then the entire foundation of Orthodox theology might be built on a fundamental misunderstanding. What if the crucifixion story that billions of believers have accepted for 2,000 years is missing the most crucial element? What if the man history remembers as the ultimate betrayer was actually the most faithful disciple? The implications extend far beyond theological debate. They touch on questions of authority, interpretation, and truth itself. How do we determine which ancient texts preserve authentic Christian teaching? Who has the right to decide which Gospels are divinely inspired and which are heretical fiction? And what happens to religious authority when alternative scriptures surface that challenge established doctrine? These questions become even more complex when we consider the historical context in which the Gospel of Judas was written and preserved. This text emerged from communities that were already under persecution by Orthodox Christians. By the 4th century, possession of such manuscripts could result in excommunication, imprisonment, or even death. The people who copied and preserved this gospel knew they were risking everything to maintain access to what they believed was sacred truth. They weren't academic scholars or historical curiosity seekers. They were believers who considered these teachings essential to their salvation. So, when Orthodox authorities condemned the Gospel of Judas as dangerous heresy, they weren't just rejecting a theological interpretation. They were declaring war on entire communities of Christians who had organized their spiritual lives around these alternative scriptures. The systematic destruction of Gnostic texts represents one of the most successful censorship campaigns in human history. For over 15 centuries, the only knowledge most people had about these alternative gospels came from the writings of church fathers who condemned them. We knew these texts existed only because Orthodox authorities had written polemics against them. But now, thanks to archaeological discoveries like the Gospel of Judas, we can read these forbidden texts for ourselves. We can examine their claims, analyze their theology, and draw our own conclusions about their historical value and spiritual significance. And what we discover challenges not just specific Christian doctrines, but our entire understanding of how religious truth is established and maintained. The Gospel of Judas forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about authority, orthodoxy, and the possibility that history's winners might not always preserve history's truth. Because here's the thing that makes this particular manuscript so dangerous to established religious authority. It doesn't just offer an alternative interpretation of familiar events. It suggests that the most fundamental assumptions of Christian theology might be completely backwards. What if the disciples who Orthodox Christianity celebrates as heroes were actually the ones who misunderstood Jesus' message? What if the texts that were preserved as sacred scripture actually represent a corruption of original Christian teaching? And what if the man whose name has become synonymous with ultimate betrayal was actually the only apostle who truly grasped the significance of what Jesus came to accomplish? These aren't just academic questions for scholars debating in university libraries. They're challenges that strike at the heart of how millions of people understand their faith, their salvation, and their relationship with the divine. The manuscript itself reads like a conversation between teacher and student, but not the kind of gentle instruction we find in the canonical Gospels. This is intense, mystical dialogue that requires deep spiritual preparation to even begin understanding. Jesus speaks to Judas in language that would have been completely foreign to ordinary believers, using terminology that only initiates of Gnostic mysteries would recognize. Listen to how the text describes their relationship. Jesus said to Judas, "Step away from the others, and I shall tell you the mysteries of the kingdom. It is possible for you to reach it, but you will grieve a great deal." Did you catch that? Jesus specifically separates Judas from the other disciples before revealing these secrets. This isn't accidental. The Gospel of Judas presents a clear hierarchy among the apostles, with Judas alone possessing the spiritual maturity to receive the deepest teachings. But here's where it gets really controversial. According to this forbidden text, the other disciples aren't just spiritually immature. They're actively working against Jesus' true mission. The Gospel describes them as worshiping a false god, performing empty rituals, and completely misunderstanding the nature of salvation itself. Think about that for a moment. In Orthodox Christianity, the 12 apostles are the foundation of the church. They're the witnesses to Jesus' resurrection, the leaders who spread the gospel across the known world. But the Gospel of Judas portrays them as deluded followers who never grasped what Jesus was actually trying to accomplish. The text even includes a scene where Jesus laughs at the other disciples for celebrating communion. In their minds, they're participating in a sacred ritual that connects them to their master. But according to this gospel, they're actually worshiping the wrong deity entirely. Their prayers aren't reaching the true God, but a lesser divine being who created and controls the material world. This is where Gnostic cosmology becomes crucial to understanding the text. Unlike Orthodox Christianity, which teaches that God created the physical universe and declared it good, Gnostic theology presents a complex hierarchy of divine beings. At the top is the true, unknowable God. Below that are various emanations and powers, and at the bottom of this cosmic chain is the demiurge, a false god who created the material world as a prison for divine souls. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus explains this cosmic structure to his chosen disciple, revealing that most people, including the other apostles, are unknowingly serving the demiurge rather than the true God. They think they're being faithful believers, but they're actually strengthening the very prison that keeps souls trapped in physical existence. Now here's what makes Judas special in this narrative. He's the only disciple who can perceive beyond the material illusion. While the others see Jesus as a human teacher who will establish an earthly kingdom, Judas recognizes him as a divine being, temporarily trapped in physical form. And more importantly, Judas understands that Jesus' mission isn't to reform the world, but to escape from it. The text presents Jesus explaining this truth directly. You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me. Read that line carefully. Jesus isn't telling Judas to betray him. He's instructing him to help liberate the divine spirit from its physical prison. The man that clothes me refers to Jesus' human body, the material shell that temporarily contains his divine essence. By handing Jesus over to the authorities, Judas isn't committing betrayal. He's performing the ultimate act of spiritual service. This completely transforms our understanding of the crucifixion itself. In Orthodox theology, Jesus' death is a sacrifice that atones for human sin. The physical suffering matters because it pays the price for redemption. But in the Gospel of Judas, the crucifixion becomes a liberation event. The physical death is necessary not because it pays for sin, but because it frees the divine spirit from material constraints. From this perspective, Judas becomes the most compassionate of all the disciples. While the others would try to protect Jesus from harm, keeping him trapped in physical existence, Judas has the spiritual strength to help his master achieve his true purpose. He's willing to be misunderstood, condemned, and remembered as history's greatest villain in order to facilitate the most important liberation in human history. But the Gospel of Judas doesn't just recast familiar characters in new roles. It presents an entirely different understanding of what salvation means and how it's achieved. In Orthodox Christianity, believers are saved through faith in Jesus' sacrificial death and resurrection. The goal is eternal life in a perfected physical creation. But Gnostic salvation involves escaping the material world entirely. The text describes multiple levels of spiritual reality, with the physical universe being the lowest and most restrictive. True salvation means ascending through these levels until the soul reunites with the divine source from which it originally came. This isn't resurrection of the body. This is liberation from embodied existence altogether. And here's where the theological implications become truly revolutionary. If the Gospel of Judas preserves authentic early Christian teaching, then the entire framework of Orthodox Christianity might be built on a fundamental misunderstanding. What if the early church got it backwards? What if they preserved the wrong interpretation and suppressed the correct one? Consider the historical evidence. By the 4th century, when the New Testament canon was being established, Gnostic Christianity was widespread across the ancient world. These weren't obscure sects hiding in caves. They were organized communities with sophisticated theology, influential teachers, and sacred texts that many believers considered more authoritative than what we now call Orthodox Scripture. The Gnostics claimed to preserve secret teachings that Jesus had shared only with his most advanced disciples. They argued that the public teachings recorded in the canonical Gospels were elementary instruction for spiritual beginners, while the real mysteries were communicated privately to those ready to receive them. From their perspective, Orthodox Christians were like elementary school students trying to understand university-level mathematics. They had access to some basic information, but they lacked the spiritual development necessary to grasp the deeper truths. The Gnostic texts, including the Gospel of Judas, claimed to preserve those advanced teachings that were too dangerous or complex for general distribution. Now, obviously, Orthodox Christians rejected these claims entirely. Church fathers like Irenaeus and Tertullian wrote extensive refutations of Gnostic theology, arguing that these alternative Gospels were recent innovations that corrupted original Christian teaching. They maintained that the apostolic writings preserved in what became the New Testament represented the authentic voice of early Christianity. But here's what modern scholarship has revealed about this ancient conflict. The diversity of early Christian belief was far greater than Orthodox sources acknowledged. Archaeological discoveries from the past century have uncovered extensive libraries of alternative Christian texts, many dating to the 2nd and 3rd centuries. These weren't marginal documents produced by isolated heretics. They were sophisticated theological works that clearly influenced large communities of believers. The Gospel of Judas fits perfectly into this pattern. Carbon dating confirms that the papyrus manuscript dates to the 3rd or 4th century, making it contemporary with many texts that were eventually included in the New Testament. The Coptic translation suggests it was being used by Egyptian Christian communities who considered it sacred scripture. More significantly, the theological sophistication of the text indicates that it emerged from a mature religious tradition, not a recent innovation. The complex cosmology, the detailed mystical instruction, the nuanced reinterpretation of familiar gospel stories all suggest that the Gospel of Judas represents the culmination of centuries of spiritual development, rather than a sudden departure from orthodox teaching. But perhaps the most compelling evidence for the text's authenticity comes from its internal consistency with other Gnostic writings. The Gospel of Judas doesn't contradict or compete with texts like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Philip. Instead, it complements them, filling in details and providing additional perspectives on shared theological themes. This suggests that these alternative Gospels weren't independent innovations by different heretical groups. They were part of a coherent religious tradition that maintained its own understanding of Christian truth across multiple communities and centuries. The Gospel of Judas wasn't an isolated aberration. It was one expression of a major branch of early Christianity that simply happened to lose the political struggle for institutional dominance. And that's where the story becomes not just theologically interesting, but historically tragic. The suppression of Gnostic Christianity wasn't just a theological debate between different interpretations of the same basic faith. It was a systematic campaign to eliminate alternative forms of spiritual understanding that challenged emerging institutional authority. Think about what was at stake. Orthodox Christianity was developing a hierarchical structure with bishops, priests, and standardized doctrines. This system depended on the belief that salvation came through participation in church rituals and acceptance of official teaching. If people could achieve direct spiritual knowledge through their own mystical experience, what happened to the need for institutional mediation? Gnostic Christianity posed an existential threat to this developing power structure. Its emphasis on personal spiritual insight rather than institutional authority undermined the very foundation on which Orthodox churches were being built. Its teaching that the material world was fundamentally flawed challenged the Church's efforts to establish moral and social order, and its claim to preserve secret teachings that were superior to public doctrine threatened the authority of bishops and councils. The Gospel of Judas represents the most dangerous aspect of this challenge because it doesn't just offer alternative teachings. It suggests that the orthodox understanding of Christianity's foundational event is completely wrong. If Judas was actually the hero of the crucifixion story, carrying out Jesus' direct instructions, then the entire theological framework of betrayal, guilt, and institutional redemption collapses. Imagine the psychological impact on believers who discovered that the man they'd been taught to hate as the ultimate betrayer was actually the most faithful disciple. Imagine the questions they might ask about what other fundamental assumptions of their faith might be backwards. Imagine how difficult it would become for church authorities to maintain their claim to exclusive access to divine truth. This is why the Gospel of Judas had to be destroyed. Not because it was theologically incorrect, but because it was institutionally dangerous. Its very existence challenged the legitimacy of Orthodox authority and opened possibilities for spiritual understanding that church hierarchies couldn't control or profit from. The systematic destruction of this text and others like it represents one of the most successful censorship campaigns in human history. For over 15 centuries, the only information most people had about the Gospel of Judas came from Orthodox sources that condemned it as heretical fiction. The actual content remained hidden, buried in the Egyptian desert, waiting for archaeological accident to bring it back into the light. But now that we have access to the text itself, we can evaluate its claims independently of Orthodox condemnation. We can examine its theology, analyze its historical context, and draw our own conclusions about its significance. And what we discover forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how religious truth is established and maintained. Because here's what the Gospel of Judas reveals about the nature of spiritual authority. The text doesn't ask readers to accept its teachings based on institutional endorsement or apostolic succession. Instead, it appeals directly to their capacity for spiritual discernment. It presents its interpretation of Jesus' mission and invites readers to evaluate whether this understanding resonates with their own deepest spiritual insights. This approach to religious authority is fundamentally different from Orthodox Christianity, which emphasizes faith in revealed doctrine and submission to church teaching. The Gospel of Judas assumes that readers possess their own capacity for spiritual knowledge and can recognize truth when they encounter it. It treats them as potential initiates rather than passive recipients of institutional instruction. From this perspective, the suppression of the Gospel of Judas wasn't just about eliminating competing doctrine. It was about preventing believers from discovering their own capacity for direct spiritual insight. By destroying texts that encouraged independent spiritual exploration, Orthodox authorities ensured that future generations would remain dependent on institutional mediation for access to divine truth. The rediscovery of this forbidden gospel therefore represents more than just an archaeological curiosity or a theological debate. It's an opportunity to reclaim spiritual authority that was stolen from ordinary believers centuries ago. It's a chance to explore forms of Christian understanding that were violently suppressed but never completely eliminated, and the timing of this rediscovery might not be accidental. In an era when institutional religious authority is facing unprecedented challenges, when traditional doctrines are being questioned by believers who have access to information that was previously restricted to scholarly elites, the emergence of alternative gospels like the Gospel of Judas provides new possibilities for spiritual exploration. People who have grown up accepting orthodox interpretations of Christianity suddenly have access to radically different understandings of the same foundational events. They can read the Gospel of Judas for themselves, evaluate its claims, and decide whether its interpretation of Jesus' mission makes more sense than the version they were taught in Sunday school. This democratization of religious knowledge terrifies institutional authorities for the same reasons it terrified 4th century bishops. When people have direct access to alternative spiritual traditions, they become much more difficult to control through appeals to exclusive religious authority. They start asking uncomfortable questions about why certain texts were preserved while others were destroyed, and whose interests were served by these editorial decisions. The Gospel of Judas forces us to confront these questions in their most radical form. Because if this text preserves authentic early Christian teaching, then everything we think we know about the foundations of Christian faith might need fundamental revision. The implications extend far beyond academic theology into the realm of lived spiritual experience. What would it mean for modern believers to accept that Judas was actually the hero of the crucifixion story? How would it change their understanding of betrayal, forgiveness, and divine purpose? What new possibilities for spiritual growth might open up if they embraced the Gnostic understanding of salvation as liberation from material existence, rather than resurrection within it? These aren't just historical or theological questions. They're deeply personal challenges that touch on how individuals understand their own spiritual journey and ultimate destiny. The Gospel of Judas doesn't just reinterpret ancient events. It offers a completely different framework for understanding what it means to be human, what it means to be saved, and what it means to fulfill divine purpose. And that's exactly why this forbidden text remains so controversial today. 2,000 years after it was written, 15 centuries after it was supposedly destroyed, the Gospel of Judas still has the power to challenge fundamental assumptions about Christian faith and spiritual authority. Its very existence proves that alternative forms of spiritual understanding have survived every attempt at suppression and continue to offer possibilities for those brave enough to explore them. But the real shock comes when you examine what Jesus actually says to Judas in these private conversations. The language is unlike anything found in the canonical Gospels. It's esoteric, mystical, and filled with references that would have been completely foreign to ordinary first-century believers. Listen to this passage from the Gospel of Judas. Jesus said to him, "Come, that I may teach you about secrets no person has ever seen. For there exists a great and boundless realm, whose extent no generation of angels has seen, in which there is a great invisible spirit." This isn't the simple moral teaching we find in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is advanced mystical instruction that assumes the reader already understands complex spiritual concepts. Jesus isn't speaking to Judas as a teacher addresses a student. He's communicating as one initiate to another, sharing knowledge that requires years of preparation to comprehend. The text continues, "No eye of an angel has seen it, no thought of the heart has conceived it, and it was never called by any name." This is describing a level of divine reality so transcendent that even celestial beings cannot perceive it. It's the ultimate source from which all other spiritual realms emerge. But here's where the Gospel of Judas becomes truly revolutionary. It doesn't just describe this transcendent realm as an abstract theological concept. It presents Jesus explaining to Judas that this is their true home, the spiritual reality from which divine souls have fallen into material imprisonment. And the crucifixion isn't just about individual salvation. It's about demonstrating the path back to this ultimate divine source. The manuscript reveals Jesus telling Judas, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." But in the broader context of Gnostic cosmology, this instruction carries implications that would have terrified Orthodox Church authorities. In Gnostic understanding, every human being contains a divine spark, a fragment of that transcendent spiritual realm trapped within physical matter. Most people remain unconscious of their true nature, identifying completely with their material existence. But advanced souls can awaken to their divine identity and begin the process of liberation. According to the Gospel of Judas, Jesus represents the ultimate example of this awakening. His divine consciousness was never truly imprisoned by physical existence, even though it appeared to inhabit a human body. The crucifixion becomes the moment when this divine essence demonstrates its complete transcendence over material limitations. And Judas? He's the only disciple spiritually advanced enough to assist in this demonstration. While the other apostles would try to prevent Jesus' death, thereby keeping the divine spirit trapped in physical form, Judas has the wisdom and courage to facilitate its liberation. The text presents this understanding through a remarkable dialogue where Jesus explains the cosmic significance of what's about to unfold. "But you will grieve much when you see the kingdom and all its generation." This isn't referring to earthly sorrow over a friend's death. It's describing the profound spiritual challenge of witnessing divine transcendence while still being bound to material existence. Think about the psychological weight of what Jesus is asking. Judas must betray the person he loves most in order to serve that person's highest good. He must accept being misunderstood and condemned by everyone around him. He must carry the burden of appearing to be history's greatest villain while actually performing its most crucial act of service. The Gospel of Judas doesn't present this as easy or pleasant. The text acknowledges that Judas will experience tremendous grief and suffering, but it frames this suffering as the price of true spiritual understanding. Those who perceive the deeper reality behind surface appearances must often act in ways that seem incomprehensible or even evil to those operating from lower levels of consciousness. This theme appears throughout Gnostic literature. The path to spiritual liberation requires breaking free from conventional moral categories and social expectations. What appears virtuous from a material perspective might actually strengthen the prison of physical existence. What appears evil might actually serve the highest spiritual good. But here's where the controversy deepens. The Gospel of Judas doesn't just apply this principle to the crucifixion story. It suggests that this inversion of conventional morality applies to all spiritual seeking. The text implies that those who truly understand divine reality will often find themselves at odds with established religious authorities and social conventions. Consider how threatening this would have been to 4th century church bishops trying to establish institutional authority. They were creating a religious system based on clear moral guidelines, established hierarchies, and standardized rituals. The Gospel of Judas suggested that true spiritual insight might require transcending all of these external structures. Even more dangerous, the text implied that apparent rebels and heretics might actually be more spiritually advanced than Orthodox believers. If Judas, the ultimate symbol of betrayal, was actually the most faithful disciple, what did that say about other figures whom Orthodox authorities condemned as dangerous heretics? The implications extended beyond individual spiritual development into questions about religious and social authority itself. If conventional morality and institutional guidance could be so completely wrong about something as fundamental as the crucifixion story, how could believers trust any established religious teaching? This is why the Gospel of Judas had to be destroyed. Not because its theology was necessarily incorrect, but because its very existence undermined the foundation on which Orthodox Christianity was being built. The text didn't just offer an alternative interpretation of familiar events. It suggested that everything people thought they knew about good and evil, faithfulness and betrayal, might be backwards. But the manuscript contains even more explosive material. The Gospel of Judas includes detailed cosmological teachings that present the God worshipped by Orthodox Christians as a false deity. According to this forbidden text, the creator of the material world is not the ultimate divine source, but a lower spiritual being who has trapped souls in physical existence. The text describes this false god, known as the Demiurge, as ruling over the material realm and demanding worship from ignorant humans. Most people, including the other disciples, unknowingly serve this false deity while believing they're worshiping the true God. Only advanced souls like Judas can perceive beyond this cosmic deception. Jesus explains to Judas, "The God you serve is not my Father. My Father dwells in the imperishable realm." This isn't just theological disagreement, it's a complete rejection of the religious framework that Orthodox Christianity was trying to establish. In Orthodox theology, the God who created the physical world is the same God who sent Jesus to redeem it. Creation is fundamentally good, though corrupted by sin, and salvation involves restoring the original divine order. But the Gospel of Judas presents creation itself as the problem. The material world isn't corrupted. It's a prison designed to keep souls separated from their true spiritual home. From this perspective, Orthodox Christians aren't just misguided. They're actively collaborating with the forces that keep humanity trapped in spiritual ignorance. Their prayers strengthen the false god who rules the material realm. Their rituals reinforce the illusion that physical existence has ultimate meaning. Their moral teachings distract attention from the real work of spiritual liberation. The Gospel of Judas presents Jesus explaining this cosmic deception to his chosen disciple. "Come, that I may teach you about the mysteries of the kingdom, since it is possible for you to enter it. But you will grieve much." The grief isn't just about the crucifixion. It's about understanding how completely most people, including fellow believers, have been deceived about the nature of reality itself. This revelation transforms Judas from a simple betrayer into a cosmic liberator. By facilitating Jesus' death, he's not just helping one individual escape physical existence. He's demonstrating the path that all trapped souls must eventually follow. The crucifixion becomes a teaching event that reveals the ultimate meaninglessness of material life and points toward true spiritual freedom. But the manuscript goes even further. It suggests that this cosmic drama of imprisonment and liberation is ongoing. The same forces that trapped divine souls in the material world continue to operate. The same false god who demands worship from ignorant humans continues to rule. And the same choice that faced Judas continues to confront every spiritually awakening individual. According to the Gospel of Judas, we're all living within this cosmic deception. Most people remain unconscious of their true divine nature, identifying completely with their physical existence and material concerns. They worship the false god who created the material world. Thinking they're being faithful believers, they follow moral and religious guidelines that actually strengthen their spiritual imprisonment. But some individuals begin to awaken. They start questioning conventional religious teaching. They experience mystical insights that contradict orthodox doctrine. They develop the capacity to perceive beyond material appearances to the spiritual reality that underlies physical existence. These awakening souls face the same choice that confronted Judas. They can conform to social and religious expectations, maintaining their acceptance within established communities while suppressing their deeper spiritual insights. Or they can follow their authentic spiritual understanding, accepting the misunderstanding and condemnation that inevitably follows. The Gospel of Judas presents this choice as the fundamental test of spiritual maturity. Those who choose conformity over truth remain trapped in the cosmic deception. Those who choose truth over acceptance begin the difficult process of liberation from material existence. This framework explains why Gnostic communities often found themselves in conflict with Orthodox authorities. They weren't just disagreeing about theological details. They were operating from a completely different understanding of what spiritual life meant and what salvation required. For Orthodox Christians, salvation involved faith in Jesus' sacrificial death and participation in church communities that preserved apostolic teaching. The goal was eternal life in a perfected physical creation where believers would worship God in resurrected bodies. For Gnostic Christians, salvation meant awakening to their divine nature and escaping material existence entirely. The goal wasn't resurrection within the physical world, but liberation from it. Church communities were valuable only insofar as they facilitated this individual's spiritual awakening. These weren't minor theological differences that could be resolved through dialogue and compromise. They represented fundamentally incompatible visions of human destiny and divine purpose. One tradition saw the material world as God's creation to be redeemed. The other saw it as a prison to be escaped. The Gospel of Judas embodies this Gnostic perspective in its most radical form. It doesn't just critique Orthodox theology, it presents the Orthodox understanding as a cosmic deception that prevents souls from achieving their true spiritual destiny. From this perspective, Orthodox Christianity isn't just wrong. It's actively harmful to spiritual development. This explains the intensity of the conflict between Gnostic and Orthodox communities in the early centuries of Christian history. Both sides believed that the eternal destiny of human souls was at stake. Both were convinced that the other's teaching led to spiritual destruction. Compromise wasn't just difficult, it seemed like betrayal of ultimate truth. The suppression of the Gospel of Judas must be understood within this context. Orthodox authorities weren't just eliminating a competing interpretation of Christian teaching. They were waging spiritual warfare against what they considered demonic deception that threatened the salvation of believers. But from the Gnostic perspective, The Orthodox suppression campaign represented the triumph of the cosmic forces that keep souls trapped in material existence. By destroying texts like the Gospel of Judas and persecuting communities that preserved alternative teachings, Orthodox authorities were serving the false god who rules the material world. This cosmic interpretation of the suppression campaign helps explain why Gnostic texts were often hidden rather than simply abandoned when persecution intensified. Communities that possessed these manuscripts believed they were preserving essential spiritual knowledge that would be needed for humanity's eventual liberation. They saw themselves as guardians of secret wisdom that transcended historical circumstances. The discovery of the Gospel of Judas in the Egyptian desert, therefore, represents more than archaeological good fortune. From a Gnostic perspective, it's the predetermined emergence of hidden truth at the precise moment when humanity is ready to receive it. The timing isn't accidental. It's part of the ongoing cosmic drama of spiritual awakening. But here's where modern readers must grapple with the full implications of what they're encountering. The Gospel of Judas doesn't present itself as an interesting historical curiosity or an alternative theological perspective that can be safely integrated into existing belief systems. It claims to reveal the ultimate nature of reality itself. If the text's claims are true, then most of what people believe about God, salvation, and spiritual life is not just incorrect, but actively harmful. The religious institutions that billions of people trust for spiritual guidance are actually serving the forces that keep souls imprisoned. The moral and ethical frameworks that govern human behavior are distractions from the real work of spiritual liberation. These aren't claims that can be casually entertained without serious consequences for how individuals understand their life purpose and spiritual destiny. The Gospel of Judas demands a fundamental choice about the nature of reality itself. Either its cosmic vision is accurate, in which case conventional religious understanding is profoundly deceptive, or its teachings represent dangerous spiritual delusion that should be rejected entirely. This binary choice explains why the text has remained so controversial throughout history. It doesn't allow for moderate positions or partial acceptance. Either the material world is a divine creation to be redeemed, or it's a spiritual prison to be escaped. Either Jesus died to atone for human sin, or he demonstrated the path of liberation from physical existence. Either Judas betrayed his master, or he performed the ultimate act of spiritual service. The Gospel of Judas forces readers to choose sides in a cosmic conflict that it presents as ongoing and ultimate. There's no neutral ground, no way to appreciate the text's insights while maintaining conventional religious beliefs. It demands complete transformation of spiritual understanding or complete rejection of its claims. This all-or-nothing character of Gnostic teaching helps explain both its appeal and its danger. For individuals experiencing spiritual awakening, who feel constrained by orthodox religious frameworks, texts like the Gospel of Judas offer liberation from conventional limitations and access to transcendent truth. They provide a coherent alternative to religious systems that seem increasingly inadequate for addressing deeper spiritual questions. But for those committed to established religious traditions, Gnostic teachings represent existential threats that must be opposed rather than simply debated. If conventional morality and institutional authority are cosmic deceptions, then everything that gives meaning and structure to religious life becomes suspect. The rediscovery of the Gospel of Judas therefore creates a crisis that extends far beyond academic theology into the realm of lived spiritual experience. Modern readers who encounter this forbidden text must decide how seriously to take its claims and what implications their decision carries for their understanding of ultimate reality. Some will dismiss the Gospel of Judas as ancient heresy that has no relevance for contemporary spiritual life. They'll maintain their commitment to Orthodox Christian teaching, while perhaps appreciating the historical significance of discovering such early alternative perspectives on familiar gospel stories. Others will find in the text confirmation of doubts they've harbored about conventional religious teaching. The Gospel of Judas will provide them with a framework for understanding their spiritual experience that Orthodox Christianity couldn't supply. They'll begin exploring Gnostic practices and perspectives that promise direct access to divine truth. Still others will attempt some form of synthesis, integrating insights from the Gospel of Judas into their existing spiritual framework without fully embracing its radical claims about the nature of reality. They'll appreciate its mystical depth while rejecting its condemnation of material existence and institutional authority. But the text itself suggests that such moderate positions are ultimately untenable. The cosmic vision presented in the Gospel of Judas is too comprehensive and too radical to allow for partial acceptance. It demands complete transformation of spiritual understanding or complete rejection of its authority. This demand for absolute commitment reflects a broader characteristic of Gnostic spirituality that distinguished it from other forms of early Christianity. Gnostic communities didn't just offer alternative interpretations of familiar teachings, they claimed access to secret knowledge that revealed the ultimate nature of reality itself. From their perspective, conventional religious understanding wasn't just incomplete or partially incorrect. It was fundamentally backwards, serving the very forces that kept souls trapped in spiritual ignorance. True liberation required complete rejection of conventional frameworks and total commitment to the path of gnosis. The Gospel of Judas embodies this radical approach to spiritual transformation. It doesn't invite readers to modify their existing beliefs or add new insights to their current understanding. It demands recognition that everything they thought they knew about good and evil, faithfulness and betrayal, salvation and damnation might be completely wrong. This is why the text remains so dangerous to established religious authority. It doesn't just challenge specific doctrines or practices. It undermines the very foundation on which institutional religion is built. If direct spiritual knowledge is available to individuals who are ready to receive it, what happens to the need for priests, bishops, and religious hierarchies? If the most fundamental assumptions of Orthodox theology are backwards, what authority do church councils and scriptural interpretations possess? If the ultimate reality transcends all material categories and conventional moral frameworks, how can any earthly institution claim to mediate divine truth? The Gospel of Judas poses these questions in their most radical form by suggesting that history's most condemned figure was actually its greatest spiritual hero. If conventional moral judgment can be so completely wrong about something as fundamental as the crucifixion story, how can it be trusted in any other context? This challenge to moral and religious certainty explains why the text had to be suppressed rather than simply refuted. Orthodox authorities couldn't risk allowing believers to encounter teachings that might undermine their confidence in established spiritual guidance. The very existence of alternative interpretations created possibilities for doubt that threatened institutional stability. But suppression also created martyrdom. By destroying Gnostic texts and persecuting communities that preserved them, Orthodox authorities inadvertently validated Gnostic claims about cosmic deception and spiritual warfare. From the Gnostic perspective, persecution confirmed that they possessed truth so dangerous to the forces of spiritual imprisonment that violent suppression was necessary. The survival of the Gospel of Judas in hidden form for over 15 centuries therefore represents more than historical accident. It demonstrates the power of secret knowledge to transcend attempts at elimination. Truth preserved by small communities of initiates can outlast the institutions that try to destroy it. The rediscovery of this forbidden gospel in our current era raises profound questions about the relationship between hidden knowledge and historical timing. Why did this text emerge precisely when institutional religious authority is facing unprecedented challenges? why are alternative spiritual traditions becoming more accessible just as traditional doctrines are being questioned by increasing numbers of believers? From a Gnostic perspective, these developments aren't coincidental. They represent the predetermined emergence of secret wisdom at the moment when humanity is ready to receive it. The cosmic drama of spiritual awakening is reaching a crucial phase where hidden knowledge must be revealed to facilitate collective liberation from spiritual imprisonment. But from an Orthodox perspective, the proliferation of alternative teachings represents a dangerous increase in spiritual deception that threatens to lead souls away from authentic salvation. The emergence of texts like the Gospel of Judas during periods of religious uncertainty serves the same demonic forces that originally inspired heretical teachings. These competing interpretations of contemporary spiritual developments reflect the same fundamental disagreement about the nature of reality that divided the Gnostic and Orthodox communities in the early Christian centuries. The stakes remain ultimate, the choices remain binary, and the implications remain cosmic in scope. The Gospel of Judas therefore confronts modern readers with the same existential decision that faced ancient believers. They must choose between radically different visions of spiritual reality, human destiny, and divine purpose. There's no neutral ground, no way to appreciate the text's historical significance while avoiding its theological challenges. This is what makes the manuscript so much more than an archaeological discovery or a theological curiosity. It's a catalyst for spiritual crisis that forces individuals to examine their deepest assumptions about the nature of existence itself. The forbidden knowledge it contains remains forbidden because it demands complete transformation of spiritual understanding. Those brave enough to seriously engage with its claims must be prepared for consequences that extend far beyond academic interest into the realm of lived spiritual experience. The Gospel of Judas doesn't just offer information about early Christian history. It presents a path of spiritual development that leads away from conventional religious security into territories that few dare to explore. But perhaps the most shocking revelation in the Gospel of Judas isn't what it says about the past. It's what it reveals about the present. Because if this forbidden text preserves authentic spiritual knowledge that was systematically suppressed, then we're living in the aftermath of the most successful cover-up in human history. And the implications of that cover-up are still shaping how billions of people understand their relationship with the divine. Think about it for a moment. What if the version of Christianity that conquered the Roman Empire and became the dominant world religion wasn't the authentic teaching of Jesus? What if the real message was buried along with texts like the Gospel of Judas, leaving humanity with a distorted spiritual framework that serves institutional power rather than genuine liberation? The manuscript itself provides disturbing evidence for this possibility. Throughout the text, Jesus repeatedly criticizes the other disciples for their spiritual blindness and their worship of what he calls a false god. He describes their religious practices as empty rituals that actually strengthen the very forces keeping souls trapped in material existence. Listen to this passage where Jesus addresses the other apostles. "You are not from above. Your God that dwells within you and your angels have made you heir. They have done this to the generations of souls so that they might be brought to nothing." This isn't gentle correction of minor theological errors. This is a complete condemnation of their entire religious framework. But here's what makes this critique so dangerous for modern Christianity. The disciples Jesus condemns in the Gospel of Judas are the same figures that Orthodox Christianity celebrates as the foundation of the church. Peter, James, John, and the other apostles become unwitting servants of spiritual deception rather than faithful witnesses to divine truth. The text presents Jesus explaining to Judas why this deception was necessary. "I have told them mysteries beyond what is fitting for them. They have done many sinful things. The implication is clear. The other disciples weren't spiritually mature enough to receive the complete truth about Jesus' mission and the nature of salvation itself. So they were given a simplified version, elementary teachings that they could understand and transmit to early Christian communities. But this simplified version, according to the Gospel of Judas, became the foundation for a religious system that actually works against genuine spiritual development. The manuscript describes Jesus laughing at the disciples when they perform communion, thinking they're participating in a sacred ritual. From his perspective, they're unknowingly strengthening their connection to the false god who rules the material world. Their prayers aren't reaching the true divine source, but feeding the very forces that keep souls imprisoned in physical existence. This presents a terrifying possibility for modern believers. What if the religious practices that billions of people rely on for spiritual guidance are actually counterproductive? What if prayer, worship, and moral behavior as commonly understood serve the cosmic deception rather than authentic spiritual development? The Gospel of Judas doesn't just suggest this possibility. It presents it as established fact. The text assumes that readers will recognize the truth of these claims once they're presented clearly. It treats the cosmic deception as obvious to anyone with sufficient spiritual insight to perceive beyond surface appearances. But the manuscript goes even further. It suggests that this deception isn't accidental or temporary. The false god who rules the material world actively works to maintain human ignorance and spiritual imprisonment. Religious institutions that appear to offer salvation actually serve this false deity by keeping souls focused on material concerns rather than spiritual liberation. From this perspective, the suppression of Gnostic texts wasn't just theological disagreement. It was a cosmic warfare between forces of spiritual liberation and those committed to maintaining the prison of material existence. The victory of Orthodox Christianity represents the triumph of deception over truth, ignorance over knowledge, imprisonment over freedom. This framework explains why Gnostic communities often describe themselves as the persecuted remnant, preserving authentic spiritual knowledge against overwhelming opposition. They weren't just religious minorities with alternative interpretations. They were resistance fighters in a cosmic battle for human consciousness itself. The Gospel of Judas embodies this resistance by preserving the most dangerous knowledge of all. The revelation that history's most condemned figure was actually its greatest spiritual hero. If conventional moral judgment can be so completely backwards about Judas, what other fundamental assumptions might be equally deceptive? The text forces readers to question everything they've been taught about good and evil, faithfulness and betrayal, salvation and damnation. It suggests that the very categories through which people understand spiritual reality might be designed to prevent genuine spiritual development rather than facilitate it. Consider the psychological impact of this revelation on someone raised within Orthodox Christian tradition. Their entire understanding of divine purpose, human destiny, and moral behavior suddenly appears not just incomplete, but actively harmful. The religious authorities they've trusted for spiritual guidance become unwitting servants of cosmic deception. This isn't just intellectual disagreement that can be resolved through theological debate. It's existential crisis that demands complete reconstruction of spiritual understanding. The Gospel of Judas doesn't offer a modified version of familiar teachings. It presents an entirely different reality that makes conventional religious life appear delusional. But here's where the controversy deepens even further. The manuscript doesn't just critique Orthodox Christianity. It provides detailed instructions for escaping the cosmic deception and achieving authentic spiritual liberation. These teachings form a complete alternative spiritual path that bypasses institutional religion entirely. The text describes multiple levels of spiritual reality, with detailed maps for navigating between them. It explains the structure of divine emanations that connect the material world to the ultimate transcendent source. It provides specific techniques for awakening the divine spark that exists within every human soul. Most significantly, it presents this knowledge as accessible to individuals who are spiritually prepared to receive it. Unlike Orthodox Christianity, which emphasizes faith in revealed doctrine and submission to church authority, the Gospel of Judas assumes that readers can verify its claims through their own mystical experience. This democratization of spiritual knowledge represents perhaps the greatest threat to institutional religious authority. If people can achieve direct access to divine truth through their own inner development, what happens to the need for priests, bishops, and religious hierarchies? If salvation comes through personal gnosis rather than church participation, how do religious institutions maintain their relevance and power? The Gnostic path described in the Gospel of Judas bypasses all external religious mediation. It doesn't require baptism, communion, confession, or any of the sacraments that Orthodox Christianity considers essential for salvation. Instead, it focuses on internal spiritual work that gradually awakens consciousness to its divine nature. The text presents Jesus explaining this process to Judas. "Come, that I may teach you about secrets no person has ever seen. For there exists a great and boundless realm, whose extent no generation of angels has seen." This isn't describing a distant heaven that souls reach after death. It's revealing a dimension of consciousness that can be accessed through proper spiritual development. But accessing this transcendent realm requires more than intellectual understanding of Gnostic teachings. The Gospel of Judas makes clear that spiritual liberation demands complete transformation of consciousness itself. This involves systematically dismantling identification with material existence and awakening to the divine reality that underlies physical appearances. The process isn't gentle or gradual. The text describes it as a form of spiritual death and rebirth that few souls have the courage to undertake. It requires abandoning everything that provides security and meaning within conventional life: family relationships, social status, material possessions, and even moral certainties that most people consider absolute. This explains why Gnostic communities often appeared antisocial or immoral to outside observers. They weren't rejecting conventional behavior out of rebellion or license. They were following a spiritual path that transcended ordinary moral categories entirely. Actions that seemed virtuous from a material perspective might actually strengthen spiritual imprisonment, while behaviors that appeared evil might serve the highest spiritual good. The Gospel of Judas presents the ultimate example of this moral inversion through its portrayal of the crucifixion itself. What appears to be the greatest act of betrayal in human history actually represents the most profound expression of spiritual love. Judas's willingness to be misunderstood and condemned demonstrates the depth of his commitment to Jesus' liberation. But the text suggests that this same pattern of moral inversion applies to all authentic spiritual seeking. Those who truly understand divine reality will often find themselves at odds with conventional religious authorities and social expectations. They'll be forced to choose between maintaining social acceptance and following their deepest spiritual insights. This choice becomes particularly acute when individuals discover texts like the Gospel of Judas that challenge the fundamental assumptions of their religious upbringing. Do they dismiss these alternative teachings in order to maintain their place within established communities? Or do they risk everything to explore possibilities that conventional authorities condemn as dangerous heresy? The manuscript itself suggests that this choice is the crucial test of spiritual maturity. Those who choose conformity over truth remain trapped within the cosmic deception, while those who choose truth over acceptance begin the difficult process of liberation from material existence. But here's what makes this choice so agonizing for modern readers. The Gospel of Judas doesn't just present alternative theological interpretations that can be evaluated through scholarly analysis. It claims to reveal the ultimate nature of reality itself in ways that demand complete transformation of spiritual understanding. If the text's cosmological vision is accurate, then most of what people believe about God, salvation, and human purpose is not just incorrect, but actively harmful to spiritual development. The religious institutions that billions trust for guidance actually serve the forces that keep souls imprisoned. The moral frameworks that govern human behavior distract attention from the real work of spiritual liberation. These claims can't be partially accepted or safely integrated into existing belief systems. They demand binary choice between radically different understandings of ultimate reality. Either the material world is divine creation to be redeemed, or its spiritual prison to be escaped. Either institutional religion facilitates salvation, or it perpetuates cosmic deception. The Gospel of Judas forces readers to choose sides in what it presents as ongoing cosmic warfare between forces of liberation and imprisonment. There's no neutral ground, no way to appreciate the text's insights while maintaining conventional religious security. It demands complete commitment to its spiritual path or complete rejection of its authority. This all-or-nothing character of Gnostic teaching explains both its appeal and its danger throughout history. For individuals experiencing spiritual awakening who feel constrained by orthodox religious frameworks, texts like the Gospel of Judas offer liberation from conventional limitations and access to transcendent truth that institutional authorities can't control or corrupt. But for those committed to established religious traditions, Gnostic teachings represent existential threats that must be opposed rather than simply debated. If conventional morality and institutional guidance are cosmic deceptions, then everything that provides meaning and structure to religious life becomes suspect. The rediscovery of the Gospel of Judas in our current era therefore creates crisis that extends far beyond academic theology into the realm of lived spiritual experience. Modern readers who encounter this forbidden text must decide how seriously to take its claims and what implications their decision carries for their understanding of ultimate reality. Some will dismiss the Gospel of Judas as ancient heresy that has no relevance for contemporary spiritual life. They'll maintain their commitment to orthodox teaching while perhaps appreciating the historical significance of discovering such early alternative perspectives on familiar stories. Others will find in the text confirmation of doubts they've harbored about conventional religious teaching. The Gospel of Judas will provide them with framework for understanding their spiritual experience that Orthodox Christianity couldn't supply. They'll begin exploring Gnostic practices that promise direct access to divine truth. Still others will attempt synthesis, integrating insights from the Gospel of Judas into their existing spiritual framework without fully embracing its radical claims about reality's nature. They'll appreciate its mystical depth while rejecting its condemnation of material existence and institutional authority. But the text itself suggests that such moderate positions are ultimately untenable. The cosmic vision presented in the Gospel of Judas is too comprehensive and radical to allow for partial acceptance. It demands complete transformation of spiritual understanding, or complete rejection of its authority. This demand for absolute commitment reflects broader characteristics of Gnostic spirituality that distinguished it from other forms of early Christianity. Gnostic communities didn't just offer alternative interpretations of familiar teachings. They claimed access to secret knowledge that revealed ultimate reality in ways that transcended conventional understanding entirely. The Gospel of Judas embodies this radical approach to spiritual transformation. It doesn't invite readers to modify existing beliefs or add new insights to current understanding. It demands recognition that everything they thought they knew about good and evil, faithfulness and betrayal, salvation and damnation might be completely backwards. And here's what makes this ancient text so relevant for contemporary spiritual seekers. We're living in an era when institutional religious authority faces unprecedented challenges. Traditional doctrines are being questioned by believers who have access to information that was previously restricted to scholarly elites. Alternative spiritual traditions are becoming more accessible, just as conventional frameworks seem increasingly inadequate for addressing deeper existential questions. The timing of the Gospel of Judas's rediscovery might not be accidental. From a Gnostic perspective, hidden wisdom emerges precisely when humanity is ready to receive it. The cosmic drama of spiritual awakening reaches crucial phases where secret knowledge must be revealed to facilitate collective liberation from spiritual imprisonment. But from Orthodox perspectives, the proliferation of alternative teachings represents dangerous increase in spiritual deception that threatens to lead souls away from authentic salvation. The emergence of texts like the Gospel of Judas during periods of religious uncertainty serves the same demonic forces that originally inspired heretical movements. These competing interpretations of contemporary spiritual developments reflect the same fundamental disagreement about reality's nature that divided Gnostic and Orthodox communities in early Christian centuries. The stakes remain ultimate, the choices remain binary, and the implications remain cosmic in scope. The Gospel of Judas therefore confronts modern readers with the same existential decision that faced ancient believers. They must choose between radically different visions of spiritual reality, human destiny, and divine purpose. There's no middle ground, no way to appreciate the text's historical significance while avoiding its theological challenges. This is what makes the manuscript so much more than archaeological discovery or theological curiosity. It's a catalyst for spiritual crisis that forces individuals to examine their deepest assumptions about existence itself. The forbidden knowledge it contains remains forbidden because it demands complete transformation of spiritual understanding. Those brave enough to seriously engage with its claims must be prepared for consequences that extend far beyond academic interest into the realm of lived spiritual experience. The Gospel of Judas doesn't just offer information about early Christian history. It presents a path of spiritual development that leads away from conventional religious security into territories that few dare to explore. But for those willing to undertake this journey, the rewards might be beyond anything that conventional spirituality can offer. The text promises direct access to divine reality that transcends all material limitations and institutional mediation. It offers liberation from the cosmic prison that keeps most souls trapped in cycles of ignorance and suffering. The question that remains is whether modern individuals have the courage to seriously consider these possibilities. Are we ready to examine the foundations of our spiritual understanding with the same honesty that led ancient Gnostic communities to preserve dangerous truths despite centuries of persecution? Can we risk everything we think we know about divine reality in order to discover what might actually be true? The Gospel of Judas waits in the shadows of history, challenging anyone brave enough to encounter it. Its forbidden wisdom continues to offer the same choice it presented to readers 2,000 years ago. We can remain safely within conventional spiritual frameworks that provide comfort and community, but might limit genuine spiritual development. Or we can venture into territories where ultimate truth might be found, accepting the isolation and uncertainty that such exploration inevitably brings. The manuscript itself suggests that this choice will determine not just individual spiritual destiny, but the future evolution of human consciousness itself. We stand at a crossroads where hidden knowledge is emerging from centuries of suppression, offering possibilities that could transform our understanding of what it means to be human and what ultimate salvation actually requires. The betrayer who became a hero, the villain who was actually the most faithful disciple, The forbidden gospel that reveals everything we thought we knew about the crucifixion might be backwards. These aren't just ancient mysteries for scholars to debate. They're living questions that continue to challenge anyone willing to look beyond the surface of familiar stories into depths that few have dared to explore. What will you choose? Safety in conventional understanding, or the dangerous journey toward truth that might shatter everything you thought you knew about divine reality? The Gospel of Judas has waited 17 centuries for you to make that decision. The time for choosing has arrived. But what happens when we actually examine the specific conversations recorded in this forbidden manuscript? When we analyze the exact words that Jesus supposedly spoke to Judas in private, away from the other disciples? Because the Gospel of Judas doesn't just make general claims about cosmic deception and spiritual liberation. It provides detailed dialogue that reveals the step-by-step process through which divine truth was communicated to the one disciple capable of understanding it. The conversations begin with Jesus separating Judas from the group. This isn't casual instruction given to all the apostles. This is exclusive revelation shared only with someone who has demonstrated the spiritual maturity to comprehend advanced teachings. The text records Jesus saying, "Step away from the others, and I shall tell you the mysteries of the kingdom." Notice the language here. These aren't parables or moral lessons designed for general audiences. These are mysteries, secret knowledge that requires special preparation to understand. The Gospel of Judas presents Jesus as a teacher of esoteric wisdom, who carefully selected which disciples could receive which level of instruction. But the content of these private teachings goes far beyond anything found in the canonical Gospels. The manuscript records Jesus explaining to Judas the structure of multiple spiritual realms, the hierarchy of divine beings, and the cosmic forces that keep souls trapped in material existence. This is advanced metaphysical instruction that assumes the student already understands basic spiritual principles. Listen to this passage where Jesus describes the ultimate divine source. There exists a great and boundless realm, whose extent no generation of angels has seen, in which there is a great invisible spirit, which no eye of an angel has ever seen, no thought of the heart has ever comprehended, and it was never called by any name. This isn't the personal God of Orthodox Christianity who intervenes in human history and responds to prayer. This is an abstract principle of pure consciousness that transcends all categories and descriptions. It's so far beyond ordinary understanding that even celestial beings cannot perceive it directly. The Gospel of Judas presents Jesus explaining to Judas that this transcendent reality is their true home, the spiritual source from which divine souls have fallen into material imprisonment. But here's where the teaching becomes truly revolutionary. According to this forbidden text, most people, including the other disciples, worship a false deity who created and rules the physical world. The manuscript records Jesus telling Judas, "Your God that you serve is not my Father." But he's not just talking about pagan deities or foreign religions. He's referring to the Creator God worshipped by Orthodox Christians, the deity who made the material universe and declared it good. According to the Gospel of Judas, this Creator is not the ultimate divine source, but a lower spiritual being who has trapped souls in physical existence. Think about the implications of this teaching for a moment. If the God worshipped by mainstream Christianity is actually a false deity, then every prayer offered, every ritual performed, every moral guideline followed serves the very forces that keep souls imprisoned. Orthodox believers aren't just mistaken about theological details. They're actively collaborating with cosmic deception. The text describes Jesus laughing at the other disciples when they celebrate communion, thinking they're participating in sacred ritual. From his perspective, they're unknowingly feeding spiritual energy to the false God who rules the material realm. Their sincere religious devotion, actually strengthens the prison that keeps divine souls separated from their true home. But the Gospel of Judas doesn't stop with cosmic criticism. It provides detailed instruction for escaping this spiritual imprisonment. The manuscript records Jesus explaining to Judas the process through which trapped souls can awaken to their divine nature and begin the journey back to the transcendent realm. This process involves systematic dismantling of identification with material existence. Souls must recognize that their physical bodies, emotional attachments, and mental concepts are temporary illusions that obscure their true spiritual identity. The goal isn't to improve or purify material life, but to transcend it entirely. According to the text, this awakening process is extraordinarily difficult because it requires abandoning everything that provides security and meaning within ordinary existence. Most people, even sincere spiritual seekers, lack the courage to undertake such radical transformation. They prefer comfortable religious frameworks that promise salvation without demanding complete reconstruction of consciousness. The Gospel of Judas presents Judas as one of the rare souls capable of this ultimate spiritual commitment. While the other disciples cling to hopes for earthly kingdoms and physical resurrection, Judas understands that true liberation requires leaving the material world behind entirely. He has the spiritual strength to assist in the most difficult demonstration of transcendence ever attempted. The manuscript records Jesus explaining to Judas exactly what this assistance will involve. You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me. This isn't betrayal, this is spiritual service of the highest order. By facilitating Jesus' death, Judas helps liberate the divine essence from its temporary physical prison. But here's what makes this instruction so psychologically complex. Jesus acknowledges that Judas will experience tremendous grief and suffering as a result of his actions. The text records him saying, "You will grieve much when you see the kingdom in all its generation." This isn't easy spiritual work. It's the most challenging assignment ever given to a human being. Judas must betray the person he loves most in order to serve that person's highest spiritual good. He must accept being misunderstood and condemned by everyone around him. He must carry the burden of appearing to be history's greatest villain while actually performing its most crucial act of divine service. The Gospel of Judas doesn't present this as pleasant or rewarding. The text acknowledges the profound psychological cost of true spiritual understanding. Those who perceive the deeper reality behind surface appearances often must act in ways that seem incomprehensible or even evil to those operating from conventional moral frameworks. This theme appears throughout the manuscript's description of advanced spiritual development. The path to liberation requires breaking free from ordinary moral categories and social expectations. What appears virtuous from a material perspective might actually strengthen spiritual imprisonment. What appears evil might serve the ultimate spiritual good. Consider how threatening this teaching would have been to 4th century church authorities trying to establish institutional control over Christian communities. They were creating religious systems based on clear moral guidelines, established hierarchies, and standardized rituals. The Gospel of Judas suggested that true spiritual insight might require transcending all of these external structures. Even more dangerous, the text implied that apparent heretics and rebels might be more spiritually advanced than Orthodox believers. If Judas, the ultimate symbol of betrayal, was actually the most faithful disciple, what did that say about other figures whom church authorities condemned as dangerous threats to proper doctrine? The implications extended beyond individual spiritual development into questions about religious and social authority itself. If conventional morality and institutional guidance could be completely wrong about something as fundamental as the crucifixion story, how could believers trust any established religious teaching? But the Gospel of Judas goes even further in its challenge to orthodox authority. The manuscript includes detailed descriptions of visions that Judas experiences, revealing the cosmic structure that underlies material appearance. These aren't simple dreams or symbolic imagery. They're presented as direct mystical perception of spiritual reality. The text records Judas describing his vision of the disciples. "I saw the 12 disciples stoning me and persecuting me severely." But this isn't just prediction of future hostility. It's revelation of the spiritual forces that operate through apparently faithful believers. The other apostles become unwitting agents of the cosmic deception that keeps souls trapped in ignorance. Jesus confirms this interpretation, explaining to Judas that the persecution he will face comes not from random human hatred, but from systematic spiritual opposition to authentic liberation. The forces that created and maintain the material prison will use every available means, including sincere religious believers, to prevent souls from awakening to their true divine nature. This framework transforms the entire conflict between Gnostic and Orthodox Christianity, from theological disagreement into cosmic warfare. The suppression of texts like the Gospel of Judas wasn't just institutional politics. It was spiritual battle between forces of liberation and those committed to maintaining the prison of material existence. From this perspective, the systematic destruction of Gnostic manuscripts represents the triumph of cosmic deception over divine truth. By eliminating access to advanced spiritual teachings, Orthodox authorities ensured that future generations would remain dependent on elementary religious instruction that actually serves the false god who rules the material world. The survival of the Gospel of Judas in hidden form for over 15 centuries therefore represents more than historical accident. It demonstrates the power of authentic spiritual knowledge to transcend attempts at suppression. Truth preserved by small communities of initiates can outlast the institutions that try to destroy it. But here's where the manuscript becomes truly dangerous for contemporary readers. The Gospel of Judas doesn't just describe ancient spiritual conflicts. It suggests that the same cosmic deception continues to operate through modern religious institutions. The same false god who demanded worship from first-century believers still rules through contemporary churches that claim to offer salvation while actually perpetuating spiritual imprisonment. According to this forbidden text, most of what passes for Christian spirituality today serves the very forces that keep souls trapped in material existence. Prayer, worship, and moral behavior, as commonly understood, actually strengthen connection to the demiurge rather than the true divine source. Religious institutions that appear to facilitate salvation actually prevent authentic spiritual development. This presents a terrifying possibility for modern believers. What if the spiritual practices that billions of people rely on for divine connection are actually counterproductive? What if religious authorities who claim to guide souls toward heaven are unknowingly serving the cosmic prison system? What if the entire framework of contemporary Christianity is built on the same fundamental deception that the Gospel of Judas exposes? The manuscript doesn't just suggest these possibilities. It presents them as established spiritual facts that become obvious once souls develop sufficient perception to see beyond material appearances. The text assumes that readers with proper preparation will recognize the truth of these claims through their own mystical experience, rather than accepting them as abstract theological propositions. This emphasis on direct spiritual verification represents one of the most dangerous aspects of Gnostic teaching from the perspective of institutional religious authority. If individuals can access divine truth through their own inner development, what happens to the need for priests, bishops, and religious hierarchies? If salvation comes through personal gnosis rather than church participation, how do religious institutions maintain their relevance and control? The Gospel of Judas provides detailed instruction for achieving this direct spiritual access. The manuscript describes specific techniques for awakening the divine spark that exists within every human soul, methods for perceiving beyond material illusion, and practices for ascending through multiple levels of spiritual reality toward ultimate union with the transcendent source. These teachings form a complete alternative spiritual path that bypasses institutional religion entirely. Unlike Orthodox Christianity, which emphasizes faith in revealed doctrine and submission to church authority, the Gnostic path described in the Gospel of Judas focuses on internal transformation that gradually awakens consciousness to its divine nature. The text presents Jesus explaining this process to Judas through detailed cosmological instruction that maps the structure of spiritual reality. Multiple levels of divine emanation connect the material world to the ultimate transcendent source. Souls can learn to navigate between these levels, gradually ascending toward their true spiritual home. But accessing these higher realms requires more than intellectual understanding of Gnostic teachings. The Gospel of Judas makes clear that spiritual liberation demands complete transformation of consciousness itself. This involves systematically dismantling identification with material existence and awakening to the divine reality that underlies physical appearances. The process isn't gentle or gradual. The text describes it as a form of spiritual death and rebirth that few souls have the courage to undertake. It requires abandoning everything that provides security and meaning within conventional life: family relationships, social status, material possessions, and even moral certainties that most people consider absolute. This explains why Gnostic communities often appeared antisocial or immoral to outside observers. They weren't rejecting conventional behavior out of rebellion or license. They were following a spiritual path that transcended ordinary moral categories entirely. Actions that seemed virtuous from a material perspective might actually strengthen spiritual imprisonment, while behaviors that appeared questionable might serve the highest spiritual good. The Gospel of Judas presents the ultimate example of this moral complexity through its portrayal of the crucifixion itself. What appears to be the greatest act of betrayal in human history actually represents the most profound expression of spiritual love and understanding. Judas's willingness to facilitate Jesus' death demonstrates the depth of his commitment to authentic liberation rather than comfortable religious illusion. But the manuscript suggests that this same pattern of moral inversion applies to all genuine spiritual seeking. Those who truly understand divine reality will often find themselves at odds with conventional religious authorities and social expectations. They'll be forced to choose between maintaining social acceptance and following their deepest spiritual insights. This choice becomes particularly acute when individuals discover texts like the Gospel of Judas that challenge the fundamental assumptions of their religious upbringing. Do they dismiss these alternative teachings in order to maintain their place within established communities, or do they risk everything to explore possibilities that conventional authorities condemn as dangerous heresy? The Gospel of Judas itself suggests that this choice represents the crucial test of spiritual maturity. Those who choose conformity over truth remain trapped within the cosmic deception, while those who choose truth over acceptance begin the difficult process of liberation from material existence. For modern readers encountering this forbidden text, the implications extend far beyond historical curiosity into questions about their own spiritual development and ultimate destiny. The manuscript doesn't just offer alternative interpretations of familiar gospel stories. It presents a completely different framework for understanding what salvation means and how it's achieved. If the Gospel of Judas preserves authentic early Christian teaching, then the version of Christianity that became orthodox might represent a fundamental corruption of Jesus' original message. The emphasis on institutional authority, moral behavior, and physical resurrection could be elementary teachings that were never intended to constitute complete spiritual instruction. From this perspective, Orthodox Christianity becomes a preparatory stage that can lead souls toward more advanced spiritual understanding, but becomes an obstacle if mistaken for the ultimate truth itself. The danger lies not in the basic teachings, but in the assumption that they represent complete revelation rather than beginning instruction for spiritual development. The Gospel of Judas suggests that Jesus provided different levels of teaching for disciples with different capacities for spiritual understanding. The public instruction recorded in the canonical Gospels was designed for ordinary believers who weren't ready for advanced mystical knowledge. The private teachings shared with Judas represented the deepest level of spiritual truth that only the most prepared souls could comprehend. This hierarchical approach to spiritual instruction explains why Gnostic communities developed complex initiation systems and carefully guarded their most advanced teachings. They weren't being secretive out of elitist pride. They understood that premature exposure to transcendent spiritual knowledge could be psychologically dangerous for individuals who lacked proper preparation. The manuscript records Jesus warning Judas about this danger. "You will grieve much when you see the kingdom and all its generation." Advanced spiritual perception brings profound challenges along with its revelations. Those who awaken to the true nature of reality must often experience periods of intense isolation and suffering, as they adjust to perspectives that few others can understand or accept. This explains why the Gospel of Judas remained hidden for so many centuries. The communities that preserved it understood that its teachings required careful preparation and gradual revelation. They weren't trying to suppress spiritual knowledge, but to ensure that it emerged at the proper time and in the proper context for maximum benefit. From this perspective, the rediscovery of the Gospel of Judas in our current era isn't accidental. It represents the predetermined emergence of advanced spiritual knowledge at a moment when sufficient numbers of souls are ready to receive it without psychological damage. The timing reflects cosmic rather than merely historical factors. Contemporary spiritual seekers who encounter this forbidden text therefore face the same choice that confronted ancient Gnostic communities. They must decide whether to accept the challenges of advanced spiritual development or remain within the comfortable boundaries of conventional religious understanding. The Gospel of Judas offers no middle ground. Its cosmic vision is too comprehensive, and its spiritual demands too radical to allow for partial acceptance. It requires complete transformation of consciousness or complete rejection of its authority. There's no way to appreciate its insights while maintaining conventional religious security. This binary choice reflects the fundamental nature of the spiritual path that the manuscript describes. Liberation from the cosmic prison of material existence isn't a gradual process that can be accomplished without major disruption to ordinary life. It requires complete commitment to transcending everything that most people consider real and meaningful. Those who make this commitment discover possibilities for consciousness that transcend anything available within conventional spiritual frameworks. But they also accept isolation from communities that can't understand or support such radical spiritual exploration. The path toward ultimate truth leads away from social comfort into territories that few dare to explore. The Gospel of Judas therefore confronts modern readers with the same existential decision that faced its original audience 2,000 years ago. We can remain safely within established religious boundaries that provide community and comfort, but might limit genuine spiritual development. Or we can venture into unknown territories where authentic divine truth might be discovered, accepting the uncertainty and isolation that such exploration inevitably brings. The forbidden knowledge preserved in this ancient manuscript continues to offer the same revolutionary possibilities it presented to early Christian communities. But accessing those possibilities requires the same courage and commitment that led ancient Gnostic communities to preserve dangerous truths despite centuries of persecution and suppression. The question that remains is whether contemporary spiritual seekers possess the inner strength necessary for this ultimate spiritual adventure. Are we ready to risk everything we think we know about divine reality in order to discover what might actually be true? Can we accept the isolation and uncertainty that comes with following authentic spiritual insight rather than comfortable religious convention? The Gospel of Judas waits in the shadows of history, challenging anyone brave enough to encounter its forbidden wisdom. Its revolutionary interpretation of Christianity's foundational story continues to offer the same choice it presented to readers throughout the centuries. We can accept familiar religious narratives that provide security and community, or we can explore possibilities that might transform our understanding of what it means to be human and what ultimate salvation actually requires. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Gospel of Judas isn't what it reveals about ancient spiritual conflicts. It's what it suggests about the ongoing manipulation of human consciousness through religious institutions that claim to offer salvation while actually perpetuating spiritual imprisonment. According to this forbidden text, we're living within a cosmic deception, so sophisticated that even sincere believers unknowingly serve the very forces that keep souls trapped in ignorance and suffering. The manuscript presents this deception as systematic and intentional rather than accidental. The false god who rules the material world actively works to maintain human spiritual ignorance through religious systems that appear to offer divine connection, while actually strengthening the prison of physical existence. Orthodox Christianity, from this perspective, becomes the most successful form of spiritual manipulation in human history, precisely because it appears so genuinely devoted to authentic salvation. Consider the psychological brilliance of this cosmic deception, as described in the Gospel of Judas. Instead of openly opposing spiritual development, the false god creates religious systems that channel spiritual energy in ways that actually prevent genuine liberation. Believers think they're worshiping the true divine source when they're actually feeding energy to the cosmic forces that keep souls trapped in material existence. Prayer becomes a form of spiritual slavery that strengthens connection to the demiurge rather than the transcendent God. Moral behavior becomes a distraction from the real work of consciousness transformation. Religious community becomes a support system for collective delusion rather than mutual assistance in spiritual awakening. The text suggests that this deception is so complete that even religious authorities don't recognize their role in perpetuating spiritual imprisonment. Priests, bishops, and church leaders sincerely believe they're serving divine purposes while actually functioning as agents of cosmic manipulation. Their genuine devotion makes them more effective instruments of deception than conscious servants of evil could ever be. This framework explains why the Gospel of Judas had to be destroyed rather than simply refuted through theological argument. Its very existence revealed the possibility that everything about Orthodox Christianity might be backwards. If the most fundamental assumptions of religious authority could be completely wrong, then no aspect of institutional spiritual guidance could be trusted. But here's where the implications become truly staggering for contemporary readers. If the Gospel of Judas accurately describes ongoing cosmic deception, then we're currently living within the most sophisticated spiritual manipulation system ever created. Every aspect of modern religious life, from individual prayer to institutional worship, serves to maintain the prison of material existence rather than facilitate genuine spiritual liberation. The manuscript doesn't present this as ancient history that has no relevance for contemporary spiritual life. It suggests that the same cosmic forces that created Orthodox Christianity continue to operate through modern religious institutions. The false god who demanded worship from first-century believers still rules through churches that claim to offer salvation while actually preventing authentic spiritual development. From this perspective, the billions of people who participate in contemporary Christian worship are unknowingly perpetuating their own spiritual imprisonment. Their sincere devotion feeds energy to the cosmic deception rather than connecting them with authentic divine reality. Their moral behavior serves the false god who created the material world rather than the transcendent source from which souls originally came. This presents modern believers with a choice that's even more radical than what ancient Gnostic communities faced. At least, early Christians had access to alternative spiritual traditions that preserved authentic teachings about liberation from material existence. Contemporary believers must recognize cosmic deception without any institutional support for alternative spiritual development. The rediscovery of the Gospel of Judas therefore represents more than archaeological curiosity or theological debate. It's an opportunity for individuals to examine their own spiritual understanding and evaluate whether their religious practices actually facilitate genuine divine connection or unconsciously serve the forces that keep consciousness trapped in material limitation. But making this evaluation requires extraordinary courage, because it means questioning everything that provides meaning and security within conventional spiritual life. It means considering the possibility that religious authorities who appear most devoted to authentic salvation might actually be unwitting agents of cosmic deception. The Gospel of Judas offers detailed guidance for this spiritual evaluation through its description of the signs that distinguish authentic spiritual development from religious delusion. Genuine divine connection produces increasing detachment from material concerns rather than stronger investment in worldly success and comfort. True spiritual progress generates capacity for direct mystical perception rather than dependence on external religious authority. Most significantly, authentic spiritual awakening creates willingness to follow inner guidance even when it conflicts with conventional moral expectations and social approval. The text suggests that souls ready for liberation will often find themselves compelled to act in ways that seem incomprehensible or even wrong to those operating from ordinary religious understanding. This criterion for spiritual authenticity explains why Judas becomes the hero of this forbidden gospel. His willingness to facilitate Jesus' death despite the personal cost demonstrates the kind of transcendent commitment that genuine spiritual development requires. He chose ultimate service over social acceptance, spiritual truth over conventional morality, divine purpose over human understanding. The Gospel of Judas suggests that contemporary spiritual seekers face similar choices as they awaken to the cosmic deception that surrounds modern religious life. They must decide whether to remain within comfortable religious communities that provide social support while limiting genuine spiritual growth, or venture into unknown territories where authentic divine truth might be discovered despite the isolation and uncertainty that such exploration inevitably brings. The manuscript presents this choice as the fundamental test of spiritual readiness. Those who choose comfort and security remain trapped within the cosmic prison, while those who choose truth and liberation begin the difficult journey toward authentic spiritual freedom. There's no middle ground, no way to partially transcend the deception while maintaining conventional religious security. This binary nature of the spiritual choice explains why Gnostic communities often appeared so radical to Orthodox observers. They weren't rejecting conventional morality and social expectations out of rebellion or license. They were following a path that transcended ordinary categories entirely, guided by spiritual insights that few others could understand or accept. The Gospel of Judas embodies this radical approach to spiritual transformation. It doesn't offer modified versions of familiar religious teachings that can be safely integrated into existing belief systems. It presents an entirely different understanding of reality that demands complete reconstruction of spiritual consciousness. For contemporary readers willing to seriously engage with its claims, the manuscript offers possibilities for spiritual development that transcend anything available within conventional religious frameworks. But it also demands the same courage and commitment that led ancient Gnostic communities to preserve dangerous truths despite centuries of persecution and suppression. The forbidden wisdom contained in the Gospel of Judas remains as revolutionary today as it was 2,000 years ago. Its interpretation of Christianity's foundational story continues to challenge fundamental assumptions about divine purpose, human destiny, and the nature of authentic salvation. Those brave enough to explore its teachings must be prepared for consequences that extend far beyond intellectual curiosity into complete transformation of spiritual understanding. The betrayer, who was actually the hero, the villain who performed the ultimate act of divine service. The forbidden gospel that reveals everything we thought we knew about good and evil might be completely backwards. These aren't just ancient mysteries for scholars to debate. They're living questions that continue to confront anyone willing to examine their deepest assumptions about spiritual reality. The Gospel of Judas waits in the shadows of suppressed knowledge, offering the same revolutionary possibilities it presented to early Christian communities. Its dangerous wisdom continues to challenge those who encounter it to choose between comfortable religious convention and the uncertain path toward authentic spiritual truth. The decision belongs to each individual reader, and the implications will determine not just personal spiritual destiny, but participation in the ongoing cosmic drama of liberation versus imprisonment that the manuscript presents as the ultimate context for all human existence.